This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. Released today, Betrayal. Tom Bower returns 4 years after his sensational book, Revenge, with a forensic, deeply skeptical dissection of the Sussexes' post-royal trajectory. His central argument is unmistakable in this book with the majority. Harry and Meghan were never the persecuted victims they portray. Instead, they engineered a lucrative, self-serving rebellion against the British monarchy, weaponizing Harry's royal birthright, Meghan's celebrity instincts, and a narrative of grievance that bears little resemblance to the objective facts. Tom Bower presents the couple as architects of their own drama. Meghan, the relentless hustler and climber who ditched family, friends, and truth for stardom. Harry, positioned as the emotionally fragile, paranoid spare who besotted and radicalized, traded loyalty to the institution for her approval. Their departure from Britain in 2020 was not about escaping racism or seeking privacy. It was a calculated exit to monetize the very titles and aura they publicly resented. With the monarchy weakened by scandal and the king's illness and 2026 looming as a potential make-or-break year, Tom Bower warns that the Sussexes' brand, built on selective memory, relentless PR, and commercial exploitation, continues to provoke fascination and interest in the outcome. The world watches not with sympathy, but to see if they will thrive or implode in divorce, debt, and disaster. I had the chance to go through this book, and overall, I am a bit disappointed, but not particularly surprised. There wasn't much new information here. In fact, a lot of the same ground was simply rehashed, while several key areas were noticeably ignored once again, especially anything involving Doria and her side of the story. This time around, there was no mention of the drama with Samantha Markle or the alleged brother, and a few other things that now all of a sudden seem to be non-existent. Much of the book recycles material directly from Harry's Spare, the Netflix documentary, Meghan's interviews, and repeated references back to Tom Bower's book Revenge. He also uses what has been put out into the media, if that tells you anything. That said, there were a few interesting breadcrumbs worth highlighting. I remain suspicious about the true origins of this narrative, but just as Diana commissioned Andrew Morton for her book, it's entirely possible something similar is going on here. It wouldn't surprise me if people from William's team played a significant role in this latest release. A good portion of these confidential sources seem to have ties to the palace. After going through this book, my gut instinct is telling me that there is a specific purpose for this book to lock in very specific narratives. One of that Meghan is a vacuous, selfish failure and that Harry has completely lost his way. There is a noticeable focus on Harry potentially finding his path back into the family and on what William might or might not do about it. Now, this is just my first impression going through this book, but as we go through each chapter and analyze it, we'll see if that starts to change. So let's dive into the book Betrayal. Kicking off with the very first chapter of Betrayal, titled Manchester, 5th September 2022, Tom Bower wastes no time establishing the central thesis of his book. Harry and Meghan's post-Megxit life is defined by ruthless self-promotion, a blatant disregard for the institutions and people who platform them, and a carefully orchestrated truth that serves only their brand. Titled simply after the date and location, Chapter 1 is not just a scene setting, it's laying the foundation of implication. Bower uses the One Young World Conference in Manchester as a microcosm of everything he wants us readers to understand about the Sussexes. They're not reformers or victims, but opportunists who hijack charitable platforms for personal gain while alienating allies and provoking the very backlash they later weaponize. Bower opens with a devastating anecdote that immediately signals his tone. Ella Robinson, daughter of One Young World's co-founder Kate Robertson, reads Meghan's proposed speech on the auto cue and groans. In quotes, "She fucked it." The speech, meant to focus on the charity's mission of empowering young leaders, instead revolves around, you guessed it, Meghan herself. The word "I" appears nearly 50 times in 10 minutes, and this is Bauer's signature forensic style at work. He doesn't just report events, he lets the Sussexes' own actions condemn them. The implication here is crystal clear that Meghan cannot resist centering every stage on her own narrative of triumph and victimhood, even when explicitly asked not to. If you recall, this was one of the excerpts that came out in the Times UK. But there's more detail added here. The chapter meticulously reconstructs the backstory of this invitation. The Robertsons were nervous about hosting the couple so soon after Megxit, which happened in March of 2020, and amid fears of explosions like the Oprah interview. However, they proceeded because, as Ella admits, no one else could get so much attention for an event. Bauer lets this hang damningly. The Sussexes' value to any cause is purely their celebrity magnetism, not substance or loyalty. He then flashes back to Meghan's previous One Young World appearances, where we saw her in Dublin 2014, Ottawa in 2016, and London in 2019, painting her as this hustler and a climber who demands top billing, photo ops with world leaders, and special treatment. All of this was detailed back in his book Revenge. The subtext, though, in this chapter is unmistakable. Meghan has always treated these platforms as stepping stones for her personal brand, discarding people and promises the moment they cease to advance her in her ambition. Tom Bauer's portrayal of the Sussex media machine is equally cutting. He names names like James Holt, Ashley Hansen, and the in-house team, and shows how they micromanage every detail, excluding mainstream journalists, restricting photographers to the trusted Omid Scobie and Misan Harriman, banning protesters, and negotiating Sky TV coverage to coincide with the Tory leadership announcement, which at that time was Liz Truss. Now, what comes through here is Ashley Hansen's salty voice of the Sussex's war machine, and demands for total narrative control reveal Bauer's deeper implication. This is not philanthropy, but it's a tightly scripted PR operation designed to project so-called compassion while shielding Harry and Meghan from genuine scrutiny. As we saw in the excerpt, we know Harry's security complaints, "I've been abandoned," and willing to risk assassination for Meghan's brand. Bauer presents this as self-dramatizing, contrasting sharply with the couple's rush to leave Manchester immediately after the speech, ignoring the organizers' indignation. Now, in summary, going back over the speech itself that Meghan gave at One Young World, she abandoned the Bill theme of ethical leadership for pure self-praise. This prompts Robertson's stark realization that Meghan is tone-deaf to others and she's toxic. Every organization inviting the Sussexes, Bauer implies, must now factor in disappointment and an inevitable storm. This sets the chapter up for its closing pivot, which the couple's whirlwind itinerary during that time with Dusseldorf for Invictus, Well Child Awards in London, is framed as this couple playing on the royal family's popularity abroad while being deliberately kept in the dark about the Queen's failing health. And in the final line of this chapter, that the next morning Harry and Meghan would discover the depth of the royal family's distrust, is a chilling hook, I think. Bauer is signaling that this self-centered Manchester appearance is not an isolated incident, but the opening act of a larger betrayal narrative culminating in the seismic events of September 2022. Now, throughout this initial chapter, Bauer's implications are deliberate. He does not call Meghan narcissistic outright. Instead, he shows her repeatedly prioritizing her truth, her image, and her brand over gratitude, collaboration, and duty. Harry, in this case, is appearing as the willing enabler, ever the professional in public but increasingly isolated and desperate. The chapter subtly contrasts the Sussex's behavior with the quiet dignity of royal service that is about to be shattered by the Queen's death, making the title Betrayal feel earned right from the beginning. I think Tom Bower does a really good job here at using this single high-profile event to set the tone of exposing the Sussex's pattern of entitlement, manipulation, and alienation. Chapter 1 doesn't just introduce the story. What it does here for the reader, and what I think it's doing, is to view everything that follows, such as the Netflix deal, Spare, the funeral, the lawsuits, through this lens of calculated deceit. And what Bower does now throughout this book with all the media that's out there is chronicle how the couple's so-called fight for the future of the royal family was in reality a fight for their own unchecked relevance and ego. And you'll start to see this as we go through reviewing this book. So now when we begin into chapter 2, titled Global Celebrity, Tom Bower now shifts from the present-day drama of chapter 1 into this sharp, unflinching origin story. He rewinds to the very first moments of Harry and Meghan's relationship that was put out into the public of July 2016. Bower goes ahead and uses this chapter to establish the foundational betrayal at the heart of the entire book, and that is Meghan's deliberate, self-serving pursuit of Harry as her ride to global stardom, and Harry's eager surrender to her narrative of victimhood. Where Chapter 1 showed the Sussexes in action as entitled opportunists, Chapter 2 now reveals why they became that way, and Bower's implications are, in my opinion, devastatingly clear from the opening paragraph. You see, Bower wastes no time signaling his so-called thesis that Meghan initiated the blind date while on the verge of losing her role in the cable TV series Suits and her Canadian boyfriend. At the time, this was a 34-year-old actress who had just confessed to her publicist that she planned to freeze her eggs. Harry, by contrast, is painted in this chapter as a confused character crying out for love and punished for his vulnerability. The subtext is immediate. I think we all at this point can agree that this was never an equal partnership of souls. It was a strategic landing by a hustler who researched Harry via Google and quickly positioned herself as the sympathetic listener that Harry needed and craved. In my opinion, Bower's write-up about the Botswana safari scenes are particularly damning. He writes around Meghan patiently absorbing Harry's list of woes and paranoid fears, succeeding where Cressida Bonus failed because she encouraged his certainty that anything he passionately believed has got to be true. Objective facts, Bower implies, were always disposable if they got in the way of Meghan's ambition, thus translated over into convincing Harry of the same. In this chapter, the palace's early suspicions are presented as foresight. Cynical officials whispered that Meghan had found her meal ticket. Harry's outrage at this only underscores Bower's point. The prince, already too besotted, too isolated, and too eager to identify with Meghan's discomfort about the hierarchy of my family. Bower repeatedly returns to this dynamic. Harry saw in Meghan a fellow outsider who would validate his grievances, while she saw a prince shaped shortcut to the fame and control she had always chased. Now, the bulk of this chapter is pretty much a meticulous dismantling of the palace's so-called failed attempts to prepare Meghan for royal life. This is stuff we already know. Bower lists the coaching sessions in exhaustive detail, Meghan's baptism and confirmation, a specially prepared 30-point dossier on royal duties, and Samantha Cohen's explanations of neutrality, and a senior establishment figure's 90-minute monthly briefings on marrying the British Constitution. Each time, Meghan's response was the same. She smiled, her eyes glazed over, or she simply refused to engage. And I'd like to point out right here this paragraph where Bower writes, among the formalities designed to teach Meghan about her new life was the service to become a member of the Church of England. Unaware of the teachings of the Bible, she was helped by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, to understand the religious procedures. Pause right there. I think right here, shows that Meghan, again, is one complete lie. Meghan supposedly went to Catholic school for 6 years, but didn't know the religious teachings of the Bible. Now, here's where I see Bauer failing to challenge Meghan's past. If you really went to Catholic school for 6 years, you shouldn't be unaware of the teachings of the Bible. Again, I'm calling bullshit on what we were told about Meghan's past. Now, this next part that I found particularly revealing is the Coat of Arms episode at the College of Arms. Bauer details Meghan's request for a songbird with its tongue cut out placed on this coat of arms. And he presents this as symbolic of her self-image as a silenced victim. But I have to disagree here because what I see this is an overshadowing theme of what this couple have been doing here in the United States and their mission to silence and censor voices here, otherwise known as censorship. And again, I feel like Tom Bauer misses the mark here because throughout this book, there is no more talking about mis and disinformation and the trolls and what Christopher Boozy did. He briefly jumps in and talks about Christopher Boozy twice, but it's very light, and I'll show you that a little bit later on. But it's almost as if now the shift of Harry and Meghan focused on reshaping the media landscape is no longer present. And I feel like that is intentional, based off of everything that we've been talking about on this channel. Because like when you look at this coat of arms, why would you want that being put on your coat of arms for generations to come? That you were silenced by the royal family or looking like a choked bird here? Like, to me, I think that was all foreshadowing for what she was coming over here to do. In my opinion, I don't think that this relationship was ever serious. And what I think destroys Tom Bauer's credibility here is listing a source of a YouTube channel that is pure clickbait. When you click on that link, it takes you to this channel called Buzzline, which I've never heard of before, and this video that only has 76 views. Now, when you listen to some of this video, it's automated AI voiceover. So how the hell did Bauer stumble upon this when you have all of our channels that are talking about real information that has been gathered and dissected and pretty much proven? You're referring to a no-name channel like this? This is all so fugazi, in my opinion.
A prince, a spotlight, a crowd filled with industry elites. You'd expect thunderous applause, maybe even a standing ovation. After all, this isn't just anyone. It's Prince Harry, a royal, a global name, a man whose every move once commanded headlines. But that's not what happened.
This is just some food for thought. I'm very suspicious of this. But getting back to the book, by the wedding itself, in this chapter, Bauer has built an airtight case for mutual delusion. Meghan's Hollywood guest list, her dramatic solo walk down the aisle, replicating the sound of music, and the sidelining of her own father, allegedly Thomas Markle, are framed as early proof of self-celebration over actual duty. Now, the way that Bauer frames after the wedding is especially brutal, where he writes within 6 months, Meghan is irritated that there was little by the way of gushing praise for her, feeling unrecognized and unrewarded because royal life in her mind was too straight-laced and straightforward compared to life in Hollywood. Bauer closes implying this particular damning revelation that the clash with William and Catherine was inevitable because Meghan never accepted her supporting role. She viewed the royals in her deluded little evil head as super celebrities, not a constitutional institution. And she decided at that point that she was going to go ahead and rewrite the script on her own terms. Overall, closing out, the assessment here is that Chapter 2 really does the heavy lifting for the entire book. Bauer isn't merely recounting the history, he's proving that the betrayal began the moment Meghan decided Harry was her prize. Harry appears not as a villain, but here as a vulnerable, damaged man who handed her the keys to the kingdom, and the royal family's naivete, which I don't buy for a second, in believing she would ever play by the rules, seals the tragedy. Like, I just can't agree with Bauer on this one. You know, The royal family is not stupid, and with all the resources and access to intelligence that they have, because throughout this book it is cited that the queen had her intelligence go find out what this couple had been doing in Canada and understanding if their intent was to ever come back. I don't buy that the royal family was dumb and didn't know what this woman was about. I just can't buy that narrative. I can't. Already we're 2 chapters into this book, and I've pointed out some questionable things. Continuing on. Now moving into chapter 3 of Betrayal, titled The Tea Party, Tom Bower now gives a cinematic account of what he clearly positions as the definitive breaking point in the so-called Fab Four, and this was covered in the Times UK excerpt. This was the moment the simmering rivalry between the Sussexes and Cambridges boiled over into open confrontation. Set in William and Catherine's newly redecorated Kensington Palace apartment, shortly after Harry and Meghan's honeymoon in June 2018, this chapter demonstrates Bower at his most forensic. He uses here a single, seemingly civilized afternoon tea to expose the irreconcilable personalities, the cultural collisions, and power struggles that would ultimately tear the royal team apart. The implication is definitely unmistakable here from the opening line of the chapter. This was never a repairable family rift. It was the inevitable collision between Meghan's Hollywood entitlement and the rigid, duty-bound world of the British monarchy. Bower opens the chapter with Meghan snapping at William, "If you don't mind, get your finger out of my face," instantly framing the meeting as a total breakdown rather than a reconciliation. What follows is a meticulous reconstruction of the underlying grievances that made any genuine peace impossible. What's funny in this chapter is that Bower meticulously catalogs Catherine's growing disdain, her visible disapproval of Meghan's torn jeans, the lip gloss sharing moment that prompted Catherine's glacial freeze, and Meghan's self-described hugger style clashing with British reserve. Catherine saw Meghan as a streetwise, self-confident rival who refused to obediently serve the British people as a member of the royal team. Meghan, in turn, viewed the Cambridges as boring, jealous, and trapped in outdated hierarchy. Rehashing again in this chapter as the centerpiece is the bridesmaid dress saga involving 3-year-old Princess Charlotte. Tom Bower spares no detail, going over Givenchy's ill-fitting designs, the last-minute tailor summoned to Kensington Palace, and the frantic text exchange between Catherine and Meghan, and Catherine's emotional fragility just 3 weeks after giving birth to Prince Louis. Catherine's tearful outburst not only about the dress, but about Meghan's harsh, boss-like manner towards staff is presented as the final straw. Even the Queen, Bower notes, was disturbed by reports of Meghan's behavior. The peace offering of flowers from Catherine is dismissed as futile. Meghan's response is to interrupt and declare that the problems stem from the Cambridges themselves. What Bower is implying here is that Meghan is putting blame on the Cambridges, citing that they're the ones who are jealous of her, and they're the ones who are failing to accept her. And throughout this chapter, Bower implies that the clash was never about a dress or lip gloss. It was about 2 fundamentally incompatible worldviews. Meghan's Hollywood background made her irritated by the royals' straight-laced and straightforward approach. Meghan expected the gushing praise and celebrity-level rewards, not quiet duty and service. Her refusal to curtsy, her contempt for protocol, and her certainty that her own talent and popularity made her superior are portrayed as proof of a woman who never intended to adapt and stay. And in this moment in time, Harry appears as the passive, besotted enabler, convinced that the Cambridges were jealous of Meghan's success, just as the family had supposedly been of Diana. What I like here in this chapter is Bower's deeper accusation of how Meghan weaponized Harry's existing grievances against his brother and sister-in-law and accelerating this split. He doesn't label Meghan as entitled or just a straight-up bitch. Instead, he shows her own words and actions. The snap retort to William, the dismissive texts, the interruption of Catherine's olive branch to condemn her. The cultural divide and excuse of Meghan being an American and doesn't understand is repeatedly highlighted as the fatal misunderstanding. Meghan cannot seem to understand that you can't speak to the royal family in normal language. She didn't really understand that everything with the royal family is spoken in code. The result, Bauer implies, is a toxic dynamic where Catherine's attempts at peace are met with Meghan's aggression, and every slight is now reframed as evidence of the Cambridge's hostility and being racist. And this is where I have doubts around the whole narrative of this feud that's going on, because when you think about Meghan's life, and she was on the show Suits, she was number 6 on the call sheet. She wasn't the top dog. Why didn't she behave like this when she was working with her castmates? She successfully was a team player on that show. Why is it that she couldn't get along here? If we are to believe that Meghan went to Northwestern and she, graduated and was supposedly intelligent and all this other shit that we were given, you mean to tell me that all of a sudden, once she walked into the royal family, she became an absolute fuck up? Like, how did Meghan get by the first 40 years of her life? I get it, mostly on her back, but, she had to have some level of intelligence and some level of commitment to see certain things through in order to get to the next step. So how is it that she made it that far in life and now all of a sudden is a complete failure? It doesn't make any kind of sense to me, especially when you've reached this status in life and have access to all the best resources to help you be successful. How do you still fail? I've said this before. The one thing that they've been successful with these past 6 years and consistent with is this attack on free speech. And Bauer in this book barely discusses it. Jumping ahead for a quick second, in chapter 25, Bauer writes, "For the moment, Harry's status was uncertain. Did he enter America on an A1 head of state visa, exempting him from paying taxes and immune from any prosecution, or an O1 visa that left him exposed?" Unknown to the Heritage Foundation, while Harry publicly insisted that home for me now, for the time being, is in the States, his primary residence was still registered as Frogmore. To prevent him from the Heritage Foundation, Harry and Meghan asked how they could find help. Everything, they were advised, depended on the Democrats and the Biden administration. Over the previous 2 years, Meghan had built a relationship with the Democrat hierarchy in California. Since urging Americans during the 2020 presidential election to reject hate speech, misinformation, and online negativity associated with Donald Trump, she had visited California's Governor Gavin Newsom, sparking speculation that she was seeking nomination to Congress. The relationship produced critical advice for Harry. The president could prevent a judge ordering the release of his visa application, and indeed, the Department of Homeland Security did refuse to release Harry's application. A judge upheld that rejection. So the question here is, why did the Biden administration do that? Obviously, there was something there that they didn't want the public seeing. And this goes back to everything that I've been saying from the very beginning of why Harry and Meghan came to the United States. Bauer is sort of dancing around it by saying Meghan had told everybody to reject hate speech and misinformation. I mean, pretty much this is what they were doing in 2020 against Trump and this whole censorship apparatus. Why are we not talking more about it? But I digress. Getting back to closing out chapter 3, and this Tea Party, officially the Fab Four, is dead. And this chapter now serves as this emotional and chronological bridge between the pre-wedding coaching failures of chapter 2 that we talked about and the full-scale war that we will see unfold later in the rest of these chapters. And what Bauer ends up doing with this chapter is framing it now that this was personal and petty and entirely foreseeable. The royal family's unrealistic expectations that Meghan would somehow slot in collided head-on with her refusal to accept any restrictions. Now, I think that this chapter leaves us with no doubt that the Sussexes' revolt began not with grand principles, but with Meghan and her unshakable conviction that the rules simply don't apply to her because she never intended on staying. Now, I'm of the belief that there was a plan before Meghan met Harry. Coming up in our next video, we'll dissect chapters 4, 5, and 6, where Tom Bower gets more into the psychology of Prince Harry and how he was susceptible to falling for this trap. If you like this video and you want to hear more, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button and turn your notifications on. You don't want to miss the rest of the series. And on that note, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Definitely leave your comments below. And as always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
Such a fraud.